for staff. Alderman?
So I'm looking at our total annual fully funded cost, and it looks like it's going from around $6 million to $7 million. Can you explain that?
Yes, sir. So the fully funded cost would be if that's the part where the aggregate insurance would kick in. The increase is due because it's not just the fixed cost, it's also the claims costs. So they're anticipating your expected plus about a 25% top on that.
So that's a big increase. So that
is.
That's where my concern lies, because it's really not sustainable. This is something I know y'all, but I think recognize. What we can do with it, I don't know. I get how losses play into the premium. I understand that part of it. Did we look at any type of guaranteed cost type program? Or are we looking at possibly going back away from the self-insured program at some point in the future? No.
Sure. We're about to enter each year. It's with stop loss. We review the stop loss plan each year. And to your point, if there's a more efficient way for us to do this, while considering the risk and managing the risk to the city and the taxpayer, we would do that.
Okay.
We will do that.
And since the issue of the bidding came up, I did get a call today. This doesn't affect our brokers, but it is a question for Ms. Piefer and Mr. Walensky. This individual called and said that the issue to bid notification went out on November 6th, and then the question deadline was November 8th. And then the bid submittal date was November 14th, and then board approval is tonight, which is the December 11th. As a broker myself, I can tell you that's just not enough time to get these packets together, review them, and get competitive bids. And I think that may be one of the reasons that you had brokers who just decided not to provide bids this year. It's not a reflection on what our current brokers did. But if we're going to tout the city's ability to lower premiums by getting competitive bids, we need to give people time to go to market and get those competitive bids. So if something's wrong about this timeline, but even if it's within a few weeks, I mean, it's still not enough time for a broker to get the information and go to market and determine whether or not you need a self-insured plan or something different.
I won't disagree that it was a quick timeline for us. However, all vendors are allowed to submit questions and submit those things if they need additional time. I spoke to vendors too and told them if you would like additional time, please submit that in writing and we'll address it for you. And we got none. We didn't get any responses, and I did speak to them. So this year, every year when we do our bid process for this, it's around the same time, simply because we try to get as much of the census for them in place. So if we don't have those last 2 months of that year, it's hard. As I've understood over the last 4 to 5 years that we've done this, it's very hard for us to put out a bid and get that back and have all that information for them and get it in a timely manner. One of the things that we will be doing going forward, Alderman Massey, is looking in that as part of our third-party administrator process. When we get to a point to that, that will be up in the end of this year. That is customary. 2018, excuse me. I'm sorry, Marie, in the new year. But it is customary that the TPA actually handles and goes out and gets those quotes for you. It's a much better, cleaner process, and it will give that enough time to go out there and shop that. So those are one of the things we'll be looking at going forward. As Steve mentioned earlier about looking at different ways that we can be cost effective. That our consultant has also mentioned different things concerning the stop loss and the coverage and self-funding and so forth. So all of that is going to be looked at going forward. I think you've heard us talk about the RX and the medical claims, and the RX claims are killing us,
yeah,
to be honest with you. Those are things we're going to look at going forward in that whole process. So while I won't disagree with you that it was a fast timeline, it was necessary for us to do it that way. However, going forward, believe me, I don't want one bid. Yeah. I want to be able to get folks out there. But we did ask the questions, and I did talk to folks about giving us that, because I would have gladly pushed it off a little bit, but we didn't get that. So I had to go with what we had.
From a broker's perspective, if I saw this, I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just talking out loud now. So from a broker's perspective, if you see this timeline, you just walk away and you spend your time doing something else. So you may scare people away. You may not have gotten a request to extend the deadline because people just said, I'm not even going to ask. I'm just going to spend my time on something else at this point. So you mentioned the RX. How many retirees do we have on the plan now?
Alderman, I don't think I have that exact number.
Well, it's okay. If we could get
Well,
those numbers and the losses and give that to the board and show exactly how some of our claims break down between the retirees, what the retiree is paying compared to current employees, and break down the drug cost, break down the medical cost, so that the board can get an idea of what is driving our medical expenses up and how much of these costs are being shared by the employee. Just for the public's sake, I am on this health insurance now, and I can tell you this is not a plan that I could find in the corporate world at this price. That what I and my family pay to be on the city's insurance is very, very low. And so the taxpayer is doing us a big favor, but they're footing a big part of this bill from what I recall our conversations being, Ms. Williams. And that's good. I know you want to reward the employees, but that's something I think going forward that we have to look at because I am really concerned about whether or not this is going to be sustainable.
I'm not sure it's a matter of reward. It's also a matter of retain.
Retain, I know. I get it.
And when we place such a high value on public safety, public works, and the control and management of the infrastructure, the numbers you ask for, I do have them. If you look back at the last, and I'll get them to everybody, but if you look back at the last 4 years, and especially the last 2 years, you're seeing a tremendous escalation in the areas that Ms. Piefer cited, medical and RX. Just to give you one example, among retirees in 2014, and this is an approximate number, claims paid, actual paid out, were in the range of 550,000. Claims paid out to retirees, which includes their dependents, in 2017 reached 1.3 million. Now, when you look at that, it sounds like, well, that's a big number, and it is. The thing that's interesting is it doesn't take much to do that. As we talked about with stop loss, it takes just a couple of cases. And one of the things I've learned recently, it's been pointed out to me, we tend to think of these as people who have some serious illness that requires hospitalization and surgery. Now, with the expensive medications, they may not have a hospital procedure at all. It just may be the annual expense of medication. But I'll certainly get that information to everybody.
I think the board would just appreciate a review of the structure of the plan. You know, is there a way to class out some of these individuals and possibly make changes there to save some premium? And I understand we want to retain the employees, and I'm not disputing that, but I just think for the sake of the taxpayer, we have to look at these things.
And you also know from your involvement with the Personal Advisory Commission.
Absolutely.
We took the recommendations of the Advisory Commission. We did take those to administration. We have made those changes. We're in the process of rolling out through in-service with primarily me and one other of our staff, those changes, which include deductibles, premiums, co-pays, a third tier for pharmacy, et cetera. So we heard, we vetted, we took the recommendations, we passed them on, and we're making those changes.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Barzeza.
To the insurance folks in general, is there a grace period? If for some reason this was voted down tonight, is there a grace period in order for us as a city to come back to you at a later date? And would we be covered, our people be covered for whatever period of time that would be?
No, sir.
Okay, that answers the question.
I'm not sure I completely understand that because generally, you know, with health insurance, under this current plan, and since it's a stop loss, it may work a little bit differently. And if that's the case, that's the case. I think that Cigna's our reinsurer. Is that correct? No.
American Fidelity.
American Fidelity. Okay. So with this particular self-insured plan, then we can't get an extension and carry this on into the next month.
We asked for firm rates, guarantee, so that we would be prepared to go January 1. We don't have any other possibilities. It expire. Our current policy expires at 11:59:99 and 99 seconds, or 12 a.m. on the 1st. So we don't have any other options.
Any other questions for staff? Vice Mayor?
Mr. Walensky, can you come forward? The questions that have been raised tonight, good questions. Would you have been able to answer those had we brought those to you prior to the nth hour?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well,
Any other-
to point out,
Alderman Massey.
we get this-
Alderman Massey. We've got 2 times per person. So anyone else like to discussion that has not used up their time on the floor? It's been motioned and properly seconded.
I have a comment, Mayor.
I'll give you latitude on that, yeah.
Okay. So I'd just like to point out that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen get their packets on Wednesday or Thursday. I was out of town, so I got mine on Friday. There wasn't a lot of time to ask Mr. Walensky these questions. However, I serve on the Personnel Advisory Commission with Mr. Walensky, and I did ask some of these questions. But only I knew the answer to those questions. The public didn't know the answer to those questions, and the public deserves to hear these questions and these answers because ultimately, I am your representative. I work for the public. I ask the questions on your behalf. For me to hold that knowledge behind a closed door is not fair to the public. It's not right. It is unrepresentative, and it's not fair.
Mr. Massey, thank you. You made your point.
Mayor,
Vice Mayor,
simply
quickly.
a comment to that effect. I think that the questions that we ask our staff in a setting that is in their office where they have their facts and their figures at the ready, it prepares us for this meeting before the public, where we are here with our peers, with our citizens, whether they're viewing on television, where they can pull it up later, or whether or not they're sitting here in the pews of the chambers. And so, as far as a process that I think works for the betterment of a policy, especially if you have knowledge specific to an industry and you know those questions to ask, I think it's incumbent to, again, come where we can then come to a body prepared. And so if those questions are asked before 7:20 on a night that we vote, it is my, in all due respect, suggestion that we be prepared prior to walking into these chambers.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
We have to get the presentation,
Alderman,
Mayor,
Alderman,
before the meeting
Alderman,
in
we're
order
not-
to ask our questions. We didn't have the
we have-
slideshow.
We've had discussion on this. There's been properly motioned and seconded. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Abstain.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Alderman Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza,
I vote yes only because of the time frame involved.
The motion carries, and I'll just conclude, just for the sake of the public, that we've had this process in place 40 years or so. When I first served on this board, your packet was delivered to your house. Now it's electronically delivered to you. So the process works.